I'm Katarina Jones, and this is OtherWise Insights, lessons in leadership and entrepreneurship from the intersections of life.
Today's episode talks about remote teams. Remote work was already on the rise in popularity, so much so that people called it the future of work. Now, with coronavirus spreading, many companies are trying to figure out how to manage their teams remotely for the first time. And while working remotely can offer a ton of benefits like no commute time and flexible work hours, many companies still have questions and concerns about transitioning to an entirely remote approach. Which is why we've brought in a couple of experts with different perspectives to talk about what they have learned along the way. On today's episode, we have Joel Gascoigne.
I'm Joel Gascoigne. I'm originally from the UK, living in Boulder, Colorado. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Buffer, and we are about 90 people right now. We're a fully remote company, and we help small businesses with social media management.
And an Air Force general.
Yeah, I'm David Shoemaker. I'm a Brigadier General in the United States Air Force, currently working at Pacific Air Forces as the Chief of Staff.
For context, as Chief of Staff, David is responsible for creating and communicating plans to make sure the Air Force in the entire Pacific region is operating effectively. So that covers about 46,000 active airmen and women. In thinking about whose perspectives to compare and contrast for this episode, the military came to mind as an organization that has been working on distributed teams for a long time. They've had to figure out how to communicate and operate effectively across large distances and on a massive scale. And Buffer came to mind as a company that's 100% remote. They're known for their transparent culture and for the content that they create to help other people understand best practices for remote work. So let's see what they had to say. How can you tell if people are really doing what they're supposed to?
Yeah, the really fundamental thing is that I think there's a shift that really has to happen, that some people have already made in their minds even before they may be thinking about remote work. Maybe others have not made that shift, which is just that it's really, you've got to be focused on results, not on time people are sitting in their chair at their laptop. So that's, I think, one of the things that we've really focused on over time is being clear with each other about what are we trying to achieve as a team, and what is each person individually doing as part of that, and what are the results that we're striving for, and the pace of progress and things. And so those are the things that we'll be checking in with each other and talking about, and that's, I think, the way we'll approach accountability, and not at all based on the time you're putting in. So I think once you have that, that everything becomes easier then, because you can understand whether people are being productive or not, and then that can be a prompt for a conversation if things are moving more slowly. And I think then the other aspect is in the way that we hire and the values we have, and trying to find that alignment between personal values and the company values. And I think finding people that are self-directed and very motivated is also key for us. I think we have found over time that the amount of structure people may be used to, it can be, for us it's interesting even between much larger tech companies that have built up a lot more structure versus smaller companies may have a lot less structure. But yeah, just how much guidance they need throughout the day, because we can strive to provide a lot of touch points and guidance, but at the end of the day, when you're working remotely, you do kind of have to be alone, getting through problems, pushing through things, or being self-motivated to reach out to someone if you do get stuck. So I think that's key as well.
Yeah, obviously, Joel, our problem set is, again, very different, but a lot of what you said is true, and that's, we're results oriented. And if we're getting the results, then again, trust goes both ways. I have to trust that the hours are being put in to get those results, and the results will be the first indicator that we need to have a chat about whether or not the right level of motivation and possibly the right amount of time is going into the problem set.
How can you create a strong overall organizational culture and allow for local differences?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're an interesting case because we're 90 people and we about, I'd say about 60% in the US, but we really spread all across the world. We have, someone in Sri Lanka, a couple of people in Singapore. We've had people in South Africa before, and just all across Europe and South America and things. And so, but it is, one person here, one person there, and it's very interesting. So we don't have maybe a hub that forms as much, at least not yet. There are a few remote companies that are, at the kind of 1,000-person level, so they probably start to have that. Maybe people can gather in a co-working space in a different city if they have enough people. We're not really at that point yet. Like, the only place we could maybe consider having co-working spaces for groups of people would be somewhere like London or New York, or where we have maybe a handful of people. So that means for us that we have to be pretty mindful of different cultures and thinking through. I think we've given a lot of thought to, have we ended up creating a set of values that actually doesn't maybe align with different cultures where certain people are. We like having, some kind of bias within those things where we're making it harder for those people to, work effectively and work in a way that's natural to them as well. So I think we've tried to give a lot of thought to those things and be open to adjusting things. But I think one of the other things we do is really try and celebrate the different cultures. I think that's one of the really neat things for us. Is it is this opportunity for everyone to learn from each other, from the totally different cultures. And we do an annual company retreat once a year. It's in a different place every year. And we've done 12, or 10, 12, something around that number of those so far over time. And it's always in a new place as well. And we've kind of put it to a vote in the team. And so we're always, as a team, visiting, for most people, what's a new place, learning about that culture, and then also coming together and learning about each other's cultures. And that's a very special time. And I think, so then we're just kind of breaking down those barriers. And I think it is about maybe the values and culture we've put in place in the beginning as well, where we're trying to attract people that are very curious about that, very open to those different cultures as well. So that's, I think, a key aspect for us.
Yeah. So while we are again all over the world, in my current scope is the Pacific, but I don't have the challenge that you have, though, of trying to pull social and business cultures from all over the world together, because I'm still employing and commanding Americans, regardless of where they are. So that's really interesting to me. Obviously, one of my biggest things as I've commanded different places is I don't want to stop into somewhere and be little America. I feel sensitive to local culture, and we do have local nationals that work on our bases, so we have to be really open to that. But as an Air Force, as a military structure, it all starts at the Air Force level with our core values of integrity, service before self, and excellence. And those three things are the overarching values that then all of our cultures are built off of. And I would say in my piece of the military, and I'm in a very narrow wedge as a combat operator in the Air Force, but in my piece of the military, that culture is built on past success and heritage, and all of that nests together. The Air Force identifies itself back to really World War I, although we weren't a separate service until 1947. But when we talk about our culture, we talk about airmen making things happen and having innovation in our DNA, and being fast and flexible and being able to move to the sound of the guns. And so when I talk about the Pacific Air Forces, we think a lot, obviously, about World War II and Korea and Vietnam and those places that the Pacific Air Forces made a difference. When I go down to one of my spokes, one of my out bases, remote bases, like where I commanded before I came here, we talk about what that organization did. So an example of that culture of the spoke. I was the commander of the 8th Fighter Wing, which is known as the Wolfpack, and it has been since 1967, January 2nd of 1967, when Colonel Robin Olds got up in front of the crowd and said, "Let's go get a Wolfpack." And that day he became the Wolf, and the wing became the Wolfpack. And so I was I was the 57th wolf. We keep numbers on the wolf. And at other bases, the youngest airman, of course, salute and call the commander colonel and sir. At the wolf pack, you immediately tell the youngest airman that comes in the door, I'm the wolf. You call me the wolf. That's a bigger sign of respect than calling me, sir or colonel. That culture is so set when people show up there, and the history and heritage of the wing, and then no doubt the single-minded focus when you see Patriot missiles pointed north on your base. You have a single-minded focus. Everybody's looking the same direction, and that helps too. But it all starts at the very top, and all of those cultures of each organization, as you go down the hierarchy, have to obviously nest within that. So the wolf pack is nothing if it's not integrity, service before self, and excellence in all we do, because those are the core values of our organization.
Wow, that was really really amazing to listen to. I think what really stood out as well in that is the power of story and shared history and things to like sustain and drive culture and maintain culture over decades, which is, I think, really interesting. And it was just interesting to hear that, because I think we do have a few stories. We're coming up to 10 years in business, so it's just interesting to hear like such a different scale. We're at a much smaller scale and much earlier, but those things are also starting. There's definitely parallels there. The different stories there. And a lot of times, I think, even in this conversation coming into it, I was feeling like, level of imposter syndrome, because I'm thinking, wow, like we're just helping people send out tweets and Instagram posts, and it's about, defending a country and things. But I think there's still those parallels, right, where we've had a few kind of incidents or stories or events that have happened. We were hacked pretty early on, so we had an attack on our service, and we were only, I think 12 people or something around that number at the time, and it was very much this, okay, we've all got to knuckle down together. People were up all through the night to figure it out, and we weren't sure what the source of the attack was, and it was essentially just sending out spam content for every single user we had, and we had to kind of stop it and figure it out. And then, since then, that's been a story that's passed along, and we've actually kind of formally, like, I do something called Buffer 101 for every new team member that joins, and I share. That's one of the stories I share amongst many other stories of things that have shaped us over time, stories that relate to and are examples of our values. And that's really, really powerful, I think, and helps people have. One of the things I've always thought about with Buffer 101 is that you can come into a team as a new team member, and you come in almost saying the language you use can be different than once you've been in the team for a few years, where you come in and say, oh, they, or I work for Buffer, or instead of like I work with Buffer, I am part of Buffer, or I am them, and I think that's one of the things I've thought about a lot with Buffer 101. Is that's kind of one of my key goals with it, is to help people come in, get a lot of the context, all these stories and things, so they can feel. And then transparency is a key component of that for us, where we explicitly say, this is all you can share everything. You can go to a conference, you can hang out with industry peers and share this all information to share as well. So that, I think that helps to then that person to feel, okay, I've been here one day, but I'm part of it, and they can almost feel like they were part of some of these stories as well, which I think when you were sharing, about the wolf and things, I think that really was feeling like, oh, once that story is told, you can feel like you were almost part of that, and you're definitely part of it going forward.
I love that. I love hearing the values are also reinforced by the stories, right? And recognizing that the company has a way of operating, and then these stories really show that this is not aspirational, like this is real, this is really how we operate. And then that mission, I also really resonated with me too, David, that you were saying, it's really clear what the mission is, and being able to have the values to back up, like, yeah, we're here for a purpose, and like this is how we're going to achieve that purpose, and here are the stories to prove it. Like it's really interesting to hear how that all kind of works together.
One of the things that I've worked off for a while as a leader, and a lot of us do, I think, in the military, is people need to feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and they need to know how what they do matters to the mission. Like Joel was just talking about, when he does Buffer 101, bringing somebody in and saying coding this or doing that actually makes a difference, and here's how. For me, it was how do I tell the guy that's running my wastewater treatment plant on base that what he does matters for the mission taking bombs north, and being able to teach those guys, within one sentence, to be able to tell how they tie to that bigger mission, I think is really important. And Joel, I got to tell you, I knew I was going to learn a lot today. I've already had one big aha moment, and that is you talk about your Buffer 101. We do a similar thing, but I think we focus too much, as I was listening to you talk. I think we focus too much on the processes of staff work, and we need to probably take a step back and start more with culture and heritage of PACAF before we get into processes. So that was a great pointer.
That's really neat to hear. I think it's also probably one of the ways I lean as a leader, and I've realized over time I need to make sure I have really strong leaders around process and operationalizing things. And but yeah, for me, what Buffer 101 has almost been just purely focused on it's kind of story time, and I just say, we all get on Zoom and bring a coffee or drink and just hang out, and I'm going to share the whole story of Buffer, and there's been a lot of ups and downs and things, and I think it also helps people understand the beginnings as well, which is really powerful. It's like, okay, we really had to, I think now that we're 90 people and we're profitable, it can be, you can lose some of that, some of those values around kind of being scrappy and taking risk and like what went into some of those early days. So that's also another way we can maintain that. But yeah, I almost feel like we should have more processes and things within it as well. So it's probably, we each feel like we can go the other way there.
Let's talk about the role of transparency in remote teams.
For me, transparency is really a way to build trust, and as well as make sure people have what they need to operate effectively. Maybe Joel, you can talk a little bit about what you do in terms of transparency, because I know Buffer has an incredibly transparent culture. And then David, I'd love to hear from your perspective, like how does that compare or contrast to what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we set down transparency as a core value very early on, when we were just I think about 10 people, and we phrased it as default to transparency. We can't have this belief that the more we can make transparency the default, and really it should be the exception if something's not transparent within the team. Then we felt like that would be extremely powerful, and it really did come from that building trust aspect. And but then again, starting at 10 people is quite easy to do. So it's also been a real interesting evolution over time. I'd say in the early days it was very much just sharing everything, but trying to push boundaries, sharing all of our numbers within the team, but we even share a lot of things externally as well. Kind of, I guess, unusual for a private company. We share salary information is completely public, so anyone can Google and find all the salaries of the people in the company, as well as our formula of how we approach that. And so a lot of that is definitely around building trust as well, and also eliminating bias and things. I think it just, I feel like for us, being transparent holds us to a higher standard as well, because we've got to have very clear, clearly set down approaches to things if we're going to be sharing them. And then over time, as we've grown, we've realized it starts to break in places. So whereas in the early days, transparency was almost just achieved through everything being shared, over time we hit certain inflection points of 30, 40, 50 people, and we realized, well, this is kind of a fire hose of information now that people can't actually handle, and it's starting to really negatively impact productivity. So then you start to think, okay, what information do we want to still try and maintain transparency around? Does it actually hinder some people to have too much information? Does it make people want to be involved in decisions where they don't necessarily need to be, and you get too many people involved. Everyone kind of wants to have a say now because they've got that information, and we've really tried to maintain that transparency, but it's evolving it. And one of the ways we think about it is having kind of like I guess it's instead of push where it's push to you, it's like pull where you can find anything you need. So we're using Dropbox, Paper, or in all the different tools we use. We'll try and make sure that the information is organized. But early on, we used email a lot, and it was really like everyone would receive every email, no matter what team they're on. So then they could, and it would be kind of tagged, and so they could just archive it, but it would still be coming in their inbox. And over time, we've shifted to now we have forms of communication where it's fully transparent in terms of anyone can dip in there and go and have a look and see what's going on in this team, but it's not like pushed to you. It's not this fire hose that you have to be triaging and archiving and things. So that's the way we're evolving it over time. And I think I'm just fascinated by it being more at the scale of tens of thousands of people instead. And, you've had to really be a lot more reflective and think, okay, what is this flow of information and things? Yeah.
Yeah, so Joel, first of all, I would offer you a job because you sound just exactly like a group of generals sitting around the table. These are the exact things. Even if it's a larger scale in numbers, it's the exact same issues. And but
wow.
We're so very transparent. You can Google what I make too, and I think you'll be happy staying where you are. With that, there are obvious red lines that in transparency when it comes to classification and security that we can't cross. But that's not an excuse to say we can't be a transparent organization, particularly transparency in decision making. And the discussion that you just had, the exact things that we talk about. How much is too much information? And do we really want the guy with 2 years experience that needs to be concentrating on turning wrenches concerned with higher level policy making in a headquarters or even back in DC? So so with that, we've actually come up with a solution a lot like what you talked about under my current commander of Pacific Air Forces. We've come up with a solution where we hang information, and depending on the classification, we have different systems at different classifications. So if you have that clearance, you have that system, you can go out and you know where to find the information. So it's all there. We're not pushing it.
Mm-hmm.
But, you can pick through what you think you need out there as somebody down the chain as you need to. So there is still, again, how much is too much? Those are the discussions we have all the time. And if you ask 10 different officers, you would get 11 different answers on where the line is on getting that information out. But I think that, when we can, we kind of operate in two modes. The line is fuzzy, but we operate in two modes. One is just steady state operations, what we do day to day. And that's more like a corporation, like a large corporation. But we have to be able to flip the switch into a contingency mode or a wartime mode where things are a little bit different. So where we can be more like a corporation, just a large organization, the more we're transparent in those times, the more when we have to flip the switch, and I don't have time to tell you why I made the decision I made, you just need to do it. We build that trust in the times that we can through transparency. And then when it's time critical and we can't have you asking why, we just need you to do it, that trust is there. And so that's kind of how we've attacked it. It was interesting to hear you as you talked through that. We've had those exact same discussions, I would say, in the last 2 months around the table.
Wow.
Interesting.
That's incredible. One thing I'd be curious to maybe touch on here as well in terms of a different way of building trust. This is me, I'm curious if it is maybe something that is necessarily or it is different in military, but I think one of the things we've also been leaning into a lot in the last few years is the idea of vulnerability and like bringing your whole self to work. This is something that where we feel like transparency has been an incredible way to build trust. I think another way is managers working with their team members and kind of trying to build up that ability to be vulnerable in both ways. In a way, if the manager is actually being vulnerable about something, it builds that trust as well. And so, if someone's thinking about leaving, or if someone has something going on in their personal life that really is challenging and will affect their work, like these are things that we've tried to break through and know about earlier, or so it feels like it's better for both sides rather than feeling like, oh, I can't go there and talk about that, or if I'm starting to think about leaving, then they just give us that 2 weeks notice is much less useful for us than if they are able to share that 2 months in advance, or share when they're starting to look for other opportunities. And I think about it, can we even help them with finding the different opportunities that are better fit for them or things. So this is an area where we've thought a lot about, and yeah, so vulnerability, I'm kind of curious if that is something that happens or works in military or not.
It is, and in fact, our kind of catchphrase of the day or catchword of the day is resiliency. You'll hear that when you're hearing about the military services, and it really started as an effort to combat suicides or suicidal ideation. But really, it reaches into all of the things you just discussed. And personally, as a leader, I've always felt that each independent case isn't about that independent case. So if you have if you have an employee that's looking for other opportunities, once they've made that decision, they've made that decision. Nothing, you get to a point where there's nothing you can say that is going to keep them on that organization. How you treat it at that point is crucial for the rest of the organization. So if you make that person dead to you, then the rest of the organization hears that loud and clear. Versus if you say, how can I help you? Can I help you get a job with the airlines? Can I help you, can I harvest some of your experience by helping you get into the reserve while you go to the airlines? What can I do to help you out? And that's loud and clear to those guys that are on the fence, those people that aren't too sure if they're going to stay or go, when they see how you treat that person who's already made the decision. So absolutely, those are things that we talk about all the time. Retention is a big deal for us, and resiliency is a big deal for us.
Yeah. I was just going to mention that, I don't know if it's necessarily something else, but definitely the idea of, there are times when you just got to act, and it's kind of got to flow through the whole organization. And I think that really resonated as well. And I think for us, it's about, you kind of earn that trust over time, right? You build that up through sharing the mission, the values, and operating based on those, and all kind of being aligned as a team. So it's almost, that, in the times where we can be more transparent in the way we work, we can then earn that trust and build that up so that when we need to, we can, just make things happen and operate. I think luckily for us, we can probably have that need is probably happens less often, where we can actually, operate with, allow people to ask a lot of questions, things along the way. But we still need to move at a certain pace with things and just make things happen. So that really resonated.
So taking the idea of trust and putting it against our problem set with our remote locations, with all of our wings and numbered air forces that are out there across the Pacific, I think the number one thing for us looking at a sub-organization is acknowledging the fact that this is a way to build trust, acknowledging the fact that we don't have the information or understand the situation on the ground like they do. So swooping in, and it's made even more clear having a headquarters in Hawaii. If I swoop in from Hawaii and tell somebody in Korea how to do their job, that's met with resistance, and the trust goes right out the window. If I act like I understand the situation where they are like they do. And I think a way to combat that beyond allowing, the transparency in decision making and maybe even some help in the decision making, I think a way to help that is just actual presence. The Army has a saying that virtual presence is actual absence. So if I'm going to help build that trust, if I'm going to, walk in and give somebody an order on a base that's 4,000 miles away, they better see me at that base 4,000 miles away at some point, asking the right questions and getting my hands dirty with them. So that's kind of, again, I know it's different than your issues with your remote workers, but something that we look at for trust building.
It certainly resonates with, I think, within remote work in tech, there's a big debate and discussion around fully asynchronous working versus being synchronous. Some of the times there's this whole spectrum where you go, I think there are some remote companies out there that it's all written communication, there's no video calls. It can be even fully asynchronous. It's not even, a synchronous conversation in a chat or anything. It could just be, someone's writing like their progress update on something, and then someone else could write it at any other time later. It doesn't matter that it has to be one after the other. And then all the way to the other end, which is, actually meeting up in person. And for us, we've been trying to constantly figure out what's that balance. Obviously, the more we go to async, the more freedom people get, and it can work and kind of flow around their lives, which is really powerful and really interesting. But there's certain things that you definitely lose. I mean, I was just mentioning that I had 2 people in the leadership team in Boulder, where I live, for the last few days, and so that's unusual for a fully remote company. But the amount we can get done in a few days and the amount of trust we can also build, it's about also sharing personal stories, serendipitous moments that you just don't. They're much harder to recreate in a fully remote kind of video call environment, and that's something that we've really tried over time to be very thoughtful about as well. I think at the end of the day, it's hard to beat being in person for some of those things. I think if you're in person all the time, then there's other things that can suffer. I think it can actually have a negative impact on productivity, and things you can't get into your flow state and get work done. But for us, it's really, we try and think about, okay, what's that balance? And we've even tried things like having remote casual chats that we like. So we'll just get on a Zoom call and chat in small groups and say, okay, what's going on in life? Like, what are you up to right now? And things. And those are things that took us a while to even think of, like that we were missing or that we needed to add in, because those are things that when you're in person in an office, they happen naturally. You get lunch together, you chat about those things. So yeah, it's a combination of trying to recreate and have some of that remotely versus acknowledging the power of being in person and having that as being absolutely essential. So we have a whole company annual gathering for 1 week per year. And it is really important that people attend that. And then we also have throughout the year our on-sites, as we call them, where people get together in their individual teams, but in the same location and meet face-to-face as well. So I think it's that combination of all those different things that can make it all work.
So there you have it, from the experts. A few key takeaways for me were: build trust in the good times so that it's there when things are most critical. In order not to overwhelm people with too much information, but still maintain transparency, focus on a system that allows people to find the information they want rather than sending everything to everyone. A few ways to build trust on a remote team include transparency, valuing the expertise of the people on the front lines, dedicating time to get to know your team members the same way you would if you could grab lunch or coffee together, vulnerability, and the occasional in-person meetup to strengthen virtual bonds. And finally, building remote culture. You can do things like have a clear mission and values to live by, shared history and storytelling, and explain to every team member how what they do matters to the bigger picture. A huge thank you to Joel and to David for taking the time to share their wise insights with others. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to get our upcoming conversations. I'm Katarina Jones, and this has been OtherWise Insights.